Welcome to the second edition of the ninth episode of Tokenizing Everything. Since we had some technical issues that I have to excuse, we have to re-record this episode, and sadly Didier, and I can't blame him, wasn't able to join, but maybe we'll have him on another episode. But that's why Jan and I decided to have a quick fireside chat between us, just to give you that degree of transparency. And then we'll talk a bit about tokenization in general and the recent crypto markets and the rallies that are taking place. So Jan, as always, nice to see you and have you on the show. It's a pleasure. So how are you today?
Pretty good, pretty good. How are you?
I'm also good. It's a Sunday evening, nice time, to kind of talk about what's going on in the markets. Obviously everybody's probably still busy working, but it's still a nice break, to talk to people in the industry. So what is your take on what's going on right now on the crypto markets?
Well, I mean, I was more prepared for tokenization, but I think what's my take? I think it's always interesting. It's interesting to see how the price of just one asset, which is Bitcoin, influences the entire scene to get more active and more mobile, and it has this this effect that spreads through the entire scene because everyone's a little bit invested and everyone kind of looks to Bitcoin, and if that goes up, then even fairly unrelated things like the tokenization of old timers suddenly get more interesting, I would say, and there's more demand from like corporates to not miss the train and to stay engaged with the topic. So I would say it's always good if there's some sort of rally. It makes the press and more people find out about it. What I find confusing is that the demand from like the average people, I would say, the average Joe, basically, to join in is much less than last time, I would say. So it seems to be a much more institutional hype or growth. Yeah. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with the things you said. I think this market, the rally in general, is a bit more predictable, maybe I would say, even because like if you look at the charts, it looks a bit more healthy. If you like the rally, on the ICO craze was a bit like, just if you look at the chart, obviously there was still like some facts behind it, but still it looks like nothing is going on, and all of a sudden it went up. But this rally is a bit more gradual process, like kind of like steps. It goes up, then a bit down, like in maturity, and then it goes up again. So I think that is probably also why a result of this institutional driven influx of capital that is pushing this rally. Sure, I think retail investors are a bit more cautious, probably, especially the small ones that lost funds potentially in the last crash, and that's why I think they're a bit cautious. But still, I would say probably there's still a lot of requests probably also coming your way about people, how can I get into this market and so on. So that also shows even though the market has been going up crazy now, we're still already at the point where you should be cautious a bit, I would say, that because now the greed is starting to kick in, never a good sign, I would say, right?
Yeah, it's time to stay cool-headed and use the learnings from the last rallies to, if you're privately trading or even institutionally. But yeah, let's get back to tokenization. Like, how do you think this relates? Like, do you find there's some correlation between what's going on in Bitcoin and what's going on in tokenization, or do you think this is entirely? And because from the tech side and the use case side, it is quite different. How would you say this is going right now?
Yeah, I mean, like the use case side definitely is different. What I see from the industry, and to the listeners, these are some insights here, right? So keep that to yourself. From the industry, it's like, I feel like the fear of missing out that is starting to kick in, especially, with, retail investors and SMEs, for instance, are coming from that side, not the highest net worth individuals, but, people that have a certain degree of money and funds ready. I think that fear of missing out is starting to kick in, not only in the crypto space, but also in the tokenization space. Because like I would say, like New Year's Eve, could kind of be seen as a break, right? Before people were a bit more hesitant, and even though the rally was going on, but I think I'm speaking for most people in the tokenization industry, since the start of the new year, it's been crazy. The interest is skyrocketing again. People probably are liquidating their Bitcoin. I don't know. But at the end of the day, we really see a correlation there, but a delayed correlation, I would say, that is not necessarily simultaneously going up with the crypto markets, but it is going up. And I think, though, you have to still differ between the general crypto market and the tokenization space, because the general crypto market is more infused also by blockchain enthusiasts, people with different visions than in the tokenization space, where it's more also people from the traditional finance sector. And therefore, obviously, it's also a bit understandable that here, the growth is a bit more gradual, not so volatile, I would say, a bit more substantially, influenced by institutions that slowly tap into this market, not only institutions, but also individuals, because here we are talking about sensitive information, sensitive data, real assets, real equity of assets thereof. And therefore, it's understandable also with, the problem that, sure, jurisdictions like Liechtenstein implemented the Token Act that is quite straightforward and is ready for this token economy, and you can even passport these tokens to other jurisdictions, especially throughout the EU, as normal securities. But it's still, in other jurisdictions, even though Switzerland, for instance, is also on a great path here, in other jurisdictions, from a regulatory side, we're still at an early stage, and I'm not sure necessarily if regulatory parties actually understand tokenization and the path that we are coming to with this token economy. So I think the tokenization is really what can, at the end of the day, influence the society and the economy the most, maybe even, because actually definitely all the assets can be tokenized. But still, at the other hand, just because it has this huge impact, it will probably be a bit more slow and gradual process, just because people are a bit more cautious here, and it's about real world use cases actually, and not like an idea or an ideology sometimes that you think Bitcoin is, where sure, Bitcoin is cool, I'm a fan of Bitcoin, sure, but Bitcoin is a bit more about an ideology. We need an alternative to central bank issued currencies, fiat currencies, so to say, and therefore it's also a belief in this principle that there's a given demand, a given supply, a cap, a limit, what I mean, that there's not more than 21 million Bitcoins. And just because you have this limitation, people are like, oh, I need to get this, and it's more a belief, an idea. And in tokenization, it's more about an actual real world asset that is brought into this blockchain / tokenization space. So that is my long take on this correlation, I would say.
But couldn't you say that tokenization also has some sort of ideology or philosophy behind it, where you don't question central banks, but you question maybe notary offices, and you question how ownership structures are extremely slow in the way that changes are recorded and stuff like that? Like, I would say there is a deeper thing behind tokenization as well.
Yeah, actually, when you mention it, that's true. Yeah, that's absolutely true, because as you mentioned correctly, sure, it's a tool that basically, our blockchain here is a tool to enhance and kind of overhaul existing systems, that just have a lot of friction through intermediaries, as you mentioned, with the lawyers, the notaries, the paperwork, and so on. And that makes these processes very inefficient. And therefore, I would say, probably, I think, to be honest, I would say probably everything around blockchain is to some degree an ideology of a better future and a more decentralized and efficient future, so to say. Yeah.
So you said overhaul. Where exactly do you see the role of notary offices in the future in relationship to tokenization?
I have to be a bit careful here. Obviously, I don't want to,
I mean, for example, it could make sense that they could take on the role of sort of verifying the connection between the real world and the token on the blockchain, because there's still this danger, right? Do you think that's an area where notaries could be extremely valuable?
Yeah, actually, I think that in the future, these players, notaries, banks, lawyers, they will not be superfluous, right? But they will be, their roles will shift, their roles will change, and they will have other functions, maybe, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they will not maybe be able to charge as many fees as before because they don't take on as many responsibilities, but they will definitely be a significant part of the transitionary phase, at least, right?
Yeah.
Where kind of, you know, this bridge between the blockchain space and the tokenization space is made, and there they will play a crucial role. And especially notaries, I think, from all of them, are also going to play a role in regard to certain ownership transfers regarding these tokens, because at the end of the day, you know, when we're talking about equity tokens, for instance, we're talking about digital shares, and, or for instance, registered shares. And to some degree, from a legal standpoint here, we still need a notary signing, you know, at least maybe one document in certain cases. So for these cases, the notary will still have, you know, his or her role in place, and therefore, you know, like they will have to adjust, obviously, and adjust to these new roles and functions, and to these new economies or that are emerging. But at the end of the day, they will not fully be jettisoned, right? So I think,
I mean, maybe it even grows, right? Because if you look at, for example, I think maybe a fitting example could be something like the post offices. When email came, it went down, everyone was worried, but then online shopping came, and now there's more revenue in mailing than there was before the internet came.
Yeah,
different type, right? It's more it's more packages and less letters.
Yeah, exactly. I think so too. That's actually a great anecdote. Yeah, I think that made the headlines quite a lot recently in the crypto social media, like with the post offices. I read that too, and that makes sense, right? You know, at first maybe these players will kind of be frightened a bit, and that's understandable. But if they adjust and if they find new use cases in this, you know, token economy, then, you know, I mean, there's room for everybody in blockchain / tokenization space, and then they will definitely find their role there, I would say.
Yeah. What do you think is another good way to bridge the real world to the token world? Do you think IoT is a big trend there, or how do you see those realize?
Like IoT definitely is a big trend in terms of generally, you know, having, you know, something, you know, a great communication based, like between machines on the one hand, but also, you know, automating processes with blockchain being, you know, an underlying technology that kind of enables these also self-executing mechanisms through the smart contracts. Though I would say, you know, what is really crucial in terms of bridging this gap is education. I think, you know, this has been mentioned a lot also on the podcast, because like education is really the key, I would say, that will help people understand what's possible, right? People may not understand and you know what Bitcoin is, you know, they may not understand what Ethereum is, but they will understand, okay, I can have a share of a classic car, I can have a share of an art painting, I can have a share of, you know, a real estate property, even though it's just a fractionalized, you know, share. It still is at the end of the day a share. You still have this ownership, you still have the right, you know, the claim to maybe 1% of this asset. And I think once people understand this and really understand that they can be in full control also of their holdings, not only their assets, but also their fiat money, right, that they have in their, for instance, wallet, right, where they do not need a bank account anymore, where they do not need all these intermediaries to transfer funds from one continent to another, right, where they have to go to Western Union and pay horrendous fees, right? So, and I think when people really understand this and really understand more how this technology can help us, and not necessarily how this technology works per se, because that's obviously really difficult to understand if you're not like a tech savvy person. But if they really understand how you can leverage it, and I think that will be the key to kind of, you know, bridge these two worlds, and then, you know, they will kind of become one world, so to say. Yeah.
So, question about the future. When do you think will blockchain be taught in high school classrooms first?
Okay, that's a good question. I actually read the other day that in certain universities, you know, it's already kind of mandatory. I think even in the Frankfurt School of Finance, and to some degree, you need kind of some blockchain knowledge, and I think that's crucial.
I mean, it makes sense in especially IT focused scenarios, right? But that's, I think, more of a niche thing, where, I mean, it makes sense. The technology is 12 years old now, and it also has other aspects like hashing and stuff. But what do you think about high schools? like
High
just
school
getting
is
everyone to understand the basics?
high school is a bit difficult because like when you ask like if you ask like, okay, everybody's using the internet, right? Like how do we get taught in the internet in high school, right? So it's like
Narrowly.
yeah, exactly, and that's the thing. And I think that if maybe our educational system will be enhanced and overhauled, and I hope so, because there's a lot of flaws here. I think everybody knows about
Yeah.
this, and we will have it a bit more digitally, but other than this, I do not really see maybe in 10 years if significantly changes come. But I think before we really actually teach blockchain, we have to teach people how to use digital media, how to use the internet
Yeah.
generally as a platform, and how to also be careful, right? Because
Yeah.
all these kids in high school, they are just like, they have all these social media apps and platforms that they leverage, and they give their data to, they share their stories and everything, and that hurts them. That's bad for them. They have like too much information at the same time coming their way through all this digital world. They have this exposure, right, to the entire world basically, which can be quite difficult. So I think we first need to teach how to actually use the World Wide Web to the kids before we can think about something like blockchain.
Yeah, that's actually a very valid point. Or teach. I think another factor that plays a role here is like financial capability, like financial
Mm-hmm.
understanding, which is also not taught right now, but which
Mm-hmm.
would be necessary to then build up on that and teach about crypto as like an investment form and tokenized assets as
Yeah,
an alternative. Yeah, true. A long way to go.
definitely. Yeah.
Let's move to a faster thing. So you mentioned Liechtenstein already, and obviously a lot of people probably ask you which country is the most interesting regulatory wise. So my question would be, what would be the ideal regulation? Because no regulation is also maybe not the best thing. What do you think is
Mm.
like would be ideal?
For ideal for like tokenization,
Yes,
right?
for
Or
tokenization
yeah.
to flourish and
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
grow.
think there, Liechtenstein, and I know this sounds biased, has done a great job because they, on the one hand, set standards, how to tap into this market, certain licenses you need to obtain, There's the FMA in Liechtenstein, for instance, is doing a great job here in terms of, not just approving anybody and really, thoroughly going through their finances, going through the details and their requests for these certain licenses, for instance, in terms of obtaining a custody license, an issuance license, and so on. So I think those still at the same time they give you a certain degree of flexibility in terms of not talking about blockchain too much, and also only just so to say calling it a trusted technology. And I think that is the right way, where you kind of leave room for both. And I think you have to take care of aspects such as security, KYC, AML, but once these aspects are secured and by law guaranteed, then at the same time you can still give a degree of flexibility in which technology you want to leverage. And I think here a lot of people should definitely get a piece of the cake from the Liechtenstein jurisdiction, because they've done it so tremendously, and they've put in a lot of work here. They've been implementing it or starting the drafting the law since 2015 already, right? And I know involved attorneys like Thomas Nagele have been traveling the entire world for and to kind of present this, and we're invited to any location, to kind of teach people also on how to cope with this token economy. But obviously Liechtenstein, as a rather small country, can implement a law with this degree and scope and future impact much quicker than jurisdictions that have a much larger impact, like for instance the US, China, or the entire
Yeah.
EU as a whole, right? So I think it's like also in terms of, for instance, aspects such as DeFi, which is also an aspect where you here look at okay, how you handle this KYC aspect. I think you always have to kind of find common ground, right? You cannot be too strict. You have to let these new technologies develop themselves, but at
Yeah.
the same time you need to ensure that the aspects from the old world, so to say, actually have a proper entry point, a proper gateway, and a secure gateway to tap into this market.
Yeah. Yeah, fair point. But wouldn't a more liberal approach in terms of KYC and AML laws help tokenization grow faster? I mean, there's other reasons, like you want to fight terrorism, for example, that you have these things in place, but they probably hinder the adoption of tokenization to some degree because it's extra hurdles to take, right?
Yeah. I mean, sure, like, a bit more lax approach would definitely help accelerate growth, probably. The question here, though, is still, what would this growth look like? Would it be substantial, sustainable growth? Would it be, growth that is backed by that? You know what I mean? Like, is it growth that is backed by real world assets, or is it just like some people playing around? And because you need to also ensure, when you, for instance, tokenize an art piece, is this art piece actually there? Is it a real art piece? Is it not a fake? Right. So you kind of, it's a bit, you have to find the balance, I would say, between, on the one hand, allowing the technology take its path, but on the other hand, also not just rushing into things. And here I think there's jurisdictions, like people are always bashing Germany as a jurisdiction, and there's obviously a lot going wrong too. I believe that too, but I think in the tokenization space, in the blockchain space, they're actually doing a quite good approach, because they, on the one hand, allow these technologies to develop and, for instance, implement laws such as recently the DLT based share register that they enabled. But on the other hand, they do not rush into things too quickly and kind of, for instance, try to take note of jurisdictions like Liechtenstein, which is the same that Switzerland did, which will implement a similar law in the future of 2021. So I think, balance is the key here at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think the sustainable growth part is really interesting. So even from the, let's say, selfish interest of tokenization, it might make sense to grow a little bit slower in the beginning to not disappoint too many people, like a telecom share offering maybe has done. Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that a lot, like, interest has been growing. What are the industries that you see most requests from?
In terms of the use cases, it's the use cases are quite diverse. Obviously, one of the hottest use cases in tokenization right now, and to the listeners, again, this is some in-depth insight to the market, is real estate. Obviously, there's a lot of interest there because real estate, I mean, is a $200+ trillion market, and if you think about, the potential is there that all of this will be tokenized in the future, right? And so therefore there's obviously a great interest there, because it is obviously the largest market as well. But also there's interest, which is also a great use case, and probably one of the most efficient use cases is SMEs, right? Private equity, because here, there's barely any chance, if you're not a professional investor and you do not have a network in place, that you can invest in private equity, right? And it's also quite difficult to fundraise for private equity. So from the issuance side and from the investor side, it can be quite difficult, right? Because the investors, it's hard to find this project, and it's hard to understand, okay, does this project have value? Does the managing director is someone I can trust? And on the other hand, it's hard for the managing directors and the people that want to fundraise, the owners of the company, to find people that want to invest, that trust them, finding the right people, not, the vultures that are just in it for the money, and so it's quite difficult. And through tokenization, private equity can be kind of revolutionized, where you can have, a much broader access to this market. So obviously this will actually foster, so to say, decentralization, right, of private equity, because now more people can invest in it. And on the other hand, you can issue, the shares to more people and have a more democratic approach on how you handle your business. But also there's obviously some great interest from the field of art, because here, there's also a lot of friction in the markets, a lot of intermediaries involved, a lot of artists that complain about, the high fees and so on for listing their paintings and so on, or even in the music industry, right? So from this field, there's also some great, interest. And what has been recently developing is also from the machine industry, because obviously, these large machine plants that are worth 60 to 80+ million dollars, usually it's a quite, I would say, it's a quite long process to fundraise. It's quite difficult to finance, these machines. I've heard stories, from companies that say, okay, hey, we produce these 60 plus million machines, but we have to actually help our clients find a bank that will give them a loan. And I mean, how crazy is this, that you as the supplier also have to help your customer find a loan, right? So I think, this is something, that really needs to change. And I think tokenization will or can change this. And so there's also some interest there, because people in this industry are now starting to get aware of this and starting to get aware of how can, for instance, also tokenization be combined to a pay-per-use based system, where the shareholders of this machine, for instance, will be rewarded based on the usage of this machine, which would then be kind of like a dividend, a passive income, right? So I think there's a lot of different industries and use cases. So, but to give this question back a bit, and I know it's Sunday and it's long, so I would say let's wrap it up pretty quickly. To what to you is maybe the most exciting use case, just to kind of have like your take on this.
I think equity surely is. Like, I think this is also a very interesting market, where, especially in Germany, with only 5% of people owning stocks, there's a lot of things to get done, because even in the UK it's like 25%, so there's lots of differences. What I find really interesting is data, actually, like a digital identity, and sort of this idea of instead of giving your data to individual companies like Facebook that then use it for whatever they want to use it for, sort of having more freedom in choosing where you put your data. And Facebook might still force you and say, well, we want to have access to your data if you want to use our service for free. But giving this more transparency, I think would make the market more competitive for using data, and competition will improve the players. So Facebook will be forced to understand data better and so on. So I think this is very far out there. This is not going to happen tomorrow, but I think this is interesting. Have you seen requests from this area?
Yeah, I mean, the data industry is I mean, obviously, I think even like people like Jack Ma say it's the future, right? It's the most, auspicious industry, and he would advise all of his kids to get into the space. And I think if someone like him says that there is some sense to it, right?
Yeah.
So, and I also think, probably data it is one of the most exotic use cases, sure. And it's also one of the most probably difficult use cases to implement, but when you can implement it, and when it's being implemented, and it currently already is to some degree with projects such as Ocean Protocol, which are doing it. So shout out to them at this point. Then, there it's definitely possible, and then it will definitely have probably an even larger impact than all of the other use cases, or at least it has the potential, because data is the most valuable good of our time, and therefore, so far we do not really see too much, requests on that side, just to be transparent. But I'm pretty sure that it will come in the future, and then platforms that we provide have the chance to kind of not only tokenize data from a technical standpoint, but actually enable the legal compliance of the tokenization, and also actually morph data into a financial instrument, not only from a technical perspective where you can share data or trade data back and forth, but actually also for financial players who can then actually see data as a financial asset at the end of the day. And I think when this happens, and it will probably happen in the next 5 to 10 years, at least what I hope, then this will be a huge game changer as well, and a great and a futuristic use case for tokenization.
Very futuristic,
Exactly. So Jan, and as always, it's been a pleasure to talk, and also, it was great to catch up. And to our listeners again, sorry for the technical difficulties of the last podcast, but I hope you got some good insights here of our talk. And on next week's podcast on Friday, we actually have a data specialist with us, Manan Patel of Ocean Protocol. So we get definitely. It's great that you mentioned this, because then I will definitely get into this topic a bit more with him. So then let's wrap this up. And to our listeners, thank you as always for listening. If you want to get in contact with the Amazing Blocks team, you can visit our website, follow me on LinkedIn, write me an email. The choice is yours, and I will definitely reply, and looking forward to your questions. So thank you for listening, and see you next week.